Hello friends, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. And welcome back if you're returning. My most recent video where I read the wrong book. I read We Used to Live Here by Daniel Hurst instead of We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer surprisingly took off, like a lot more than I expected it to. So if you're here from that, welcome. I'm happy to have you here. And by popular request, I'm going to be reviewing the correct book. I did read, like almost immediately after reading We Used to Live Here by Daniel Hurst, I read We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer, and I liked it so much more. If you follow me on Goodreads, you probably saw my review, and I'll be sharing some of those thoughts here, but I'll be sharing so many more. I actually recorded that video and read both of those books about a month ago because I pre-recorded it for going out of town. And so when it popped off and everyone wanted me to review a book that I hadn't really been planning on making a video about, which is We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer, I was like, oh, like I have my review. I thought I'd taken better notes when reading it, but I really just have my review from after reading it. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll just like refresh. And so I ordered the book through one of my local bookstores, and I forgot that they don't have Amazon Prime delivery time, but that's okay. I can be patient. But I did want to record this video, so I got the audiobook again and reread the entire thing. So now I've reread We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer, and I will be giving you my full and unfiltered thoughts.
No.
I'll start out by just kind of explaining my rough thoughts with a, spoiler-free section in case you plan on reading this book. But if you don't plan on reading this book and want to be along for the second half of the ride of me reading the correct book after reading the wrong book, then you are in the right place because I will also be doing that. So don't worry, I'll tell you when the spoilers start so you can click off if you want to. But with that, let's dive into my review of the correct We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. First off, just my spoiler-free review is, wow, what a weird, wild ride this book was. I really, really liked it. I've heard some reviews from people in the comments of my last video saying how they didn't actually like this book that much, and that's fine. I respect your opinions, and I respect your reasons, too. But I will be explaining why I disagree. I really liked this book. It's a ride from start to finish, and I just really enjoyed it. First off, it does a really good job of taking a lot of the most primal fears that we have and just fully exploiting them in the best horror genre ways that it can. The premise is that these two girlfriends, Charlie and Eve being our main character, live together in this home that they just bought in rural Oregon, like super, super rural, one road in, one road out kind of rural. They're in the middle of fixing it up and a family knocks on their door and the dad says, I used to live here. Can I show my family this house? And according to the Goodreads summary, as soon as the strangers enter their home, inexplicable things start happening. And with a premise like this, you can kind of imagine one of the great fears that this horror book will be playing on is this sort of home invasion plus a lot of psychological horror sort of things. And it does all of those things very, very well in a very unnerving way. I really, really was impressed with how this was written. Some of my overall thoughts are, I really liked the characterization in this book. I thought that Eve was really, really well described. She's like an absolute ball of nerves, but in a way that someone with anxiety can really relate to. I don't want to overstate it, but she responded in ways that felt more realistic than a lot of horror protagonists do. So I really appreciated that. I also really did like how everything tied together. I've heard some people say that they felt that the way that things tied together was really dissatisfying, and I found it to be very satisfying because it does make you do a lot of the work yourself, but it gives you all of the pieces, just not in the way that a lot of books typically do. I don't want to get into it too much in the spoiler section, so if you're interested in how this works, just keep watching to the spoiler section. We'll get there. But it uses all of this multimedia. I don't know if you can say non-diegetic about things that aren't sound in film, but this media that isn't connected to what the characters know. It's like Reddit posts and news articles and transcripts of radio broadcasts that are sort of filtered in between chapters, and they use a lot of that to kind of clue the readers in on something that they can't really clue you in on through Eve, because it's all written through a very tight third person POV. It's very much you see what Eve sees. And so there's a lot of things that they kind of can't feed you through her. So they give it to you as piecemeal from the outside, which I thought was really interesting and well done. It could have been done very poorly, but I thought it worked really well. The way that the horror itself plays out too, I found to be really interesting. The sort of eldritch evil that is involved is really quite confusing, and that's the right call in my opinion. If you're doing like a really specific kind of object for the terror to be coming from, like a person or a specific demon or something, then it needs to be really well explained. But if it's something sort of amorphous and eldritch and just incomprehensible, then I don't want to fully comprehend it. But I will say, if I were a newer horror reader, I probably wouldn't have liked this book. And I am actually still pretty new to the genre as is, but the first couple of horror books that I read included a psychological horror book. It was Our Lives Under the Sea, and the ending of it is kind of just like, oh, what happened? What's real? And I didn't buy it, I didn't like it, and a couple of books that I read like that, I really didn't like how they ended, and I could see someone having a similar reaction to this. I disagree. I think that there's a lot more concrete ending happening in this book, and we'll get into that in the spoiler section, but I will just say I can understand feeling like it's not very satisfactory, even though I felt like it gave me everything that I needed to feel more than satisfied, especially on the second read. So with that being said, that is kind of all that I can talk about on a spoiler-free review. And so I'm gonna end the spoiler-free review section here and say that I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. I think I'm gonna stick with that. 5 stars is high praise, but on the second read, it actually held up better than I remembered it holding up. No, I think 5 stars is what I'm sticking with for this book. So if you wanna know all of the gory details and don't care about spoilers, let's continue on to the spoiler section. The book opens on a dark and stormy night. No, that's not true. It's the middle of the day, but it is very stormy in rural Oregon mountains. We open on Eve hearing a knock at the door and peering through the windows at these strangers on her porch. Her first evaluation of them is they look kind of like a typical family that goes to Applebee's right after church. There's a mom wearing a silver cross, a dad, and their 3 kids that look pretty well behaved. And despite her initial nerves, she decides she's gonna answer the door and see what they want. The dad of the family, who introduces himself as Thomas, says that he used to live in the house and was hoping to give his children a tour of the house while they're driving through. Eve, our protagonist, really wants to say no, but she also has this thing against confrontation where she kind of can't do it. So she decides to call her girlfriend Charlie so that Charlie can say no so she doesn't have to. But this turns out to be a mistake because it's snowing super hard, and so the dad of the family, Thomas, says, is it okay if we wait in the foyer while you call? It's really cold out here. And so they get their first foot in the house. Rookie mistake. Horrible mistake for the horror genre, if you ask me. But they're in. She does end up telling them no. She calls Charlie. Charlie doesn't pick up, so she just pretends that Charlie said no and is like, oh, sorry, my girlfriend says that now's actually a really bad time. Sorry. Too bad. But all of this isn't before she's noticed that they don't seem to have a car outside. She asks them about it, and Thomas is like, the driveway's too steep in the snow, we didn't drive up, it's down by the road. So she's a little unsettled by that, but she's like, yeah, okay, I guess so, it's a long walk, but whatever. Anyway, she's told them no, and so they start filing back out the door. And my anxious ass is like, woot woot, you did it, disaster averted, this book is not gonna be scary after all, I can rest easy. But obviously I knew that wasn't going to last because I know the book premise. And so I'm sitting there realizing, oh, they've left, I'm relaxing, I can't relax because of the premise of the book, and I'm wondering how this family is going to find their way back in when Eve does the unthinkable and feels guilty and goes, wait, just 15 minutes? And lets them inside. Eve, you were doing so good. How did you let me down already? But what's done is done. The family comes inside and Thomas gives his family a tour of the house. And we learn a few things. First, we learn that he's trying really hard not to be judgmental at the things that she and previous owners have changed about the house, such as, getting rid of the massive antler chandelier in the front room, which I would have gotten rid of right away as well. He remarks on how things have changed, like there used to be black and white tile floor and now it's wood floor. Oh, but if you look between the cracks, you can still see the old tile floor. Typical touring a house house you used to live in sort of vibe. The second thing that comes about because of this is we start to get to know his family a little bit. We have Thomas, the dad, who looks to be in his 40s or a little bit older. He's got gray around the temple. He has some like scars on his neck and his cheek that might be burn marks or something. She's not exactly sure, but just little round scars. And then there's his wife, who is pretty stern and definitely the serious type. Then they have two boys and their youngest daughter, Jenny, who is very, very curious and very talkative. Now, we gotta talk about some things about this family that feel very odd from the start. The dad says the word bastard around his kids, and his wife is like, don't say that. And he's like, what, bastard? And she's like, yeah. And it's this interesting moment where he seems surprised that his wife doesn't want him to say this in front of his kids. But they have like a teenager. Their oldest son's a teenager. So like, how long have they really been together to be surprised at his wife's preference in this way? I found that to be very weird. If they were a real family, you would think that would have come up before now. You know, it's a little unsettling. Why are you surprised by her preference in this way? After following the tour for a little while, Eve eventually leaves them behind and goes downstairs and finds her dog Shiloh growling at the basement door. Eve is pretty freaked out by this. She's also very much not a basement or attic kind of a person. This house has both of them, and we get a bit of exposition on like how uncomfortable that makes her, kind of that terrified to run up the stairs in the dark vibe. We get a lot of that from her right here, and I feel like now is a good time to talk about her characterization. I saw on one of the comments from my last video where they were talking about this book, the book that I'd meant to read all along, and how they didn't like it because they felt that Eve, the protagonist, was turned up to 100 the entire time, was scared from start to finish, just 100%, and didn't really have much build in that way. I kind of see where that is coming from, but I do pretty strongly disagree. My read on her is that she's just someone with really high anxiety. But the thing is, any regular person would have a lot of these thoughts. Like, a strange family comes to your house and asks to come in, danger would briefly cross most of our minds, but it would be pretty brief and fleeting. We wouldn't even notice it afterward, probably. But those of us with more anxiety, myself included, do sort of a very active calculation of that danger in that moment. What are the odds that they pose a threat to me? And we see a lot of this from her. She sees Thomas pull out a mint container and take 3 mints at once in a way that looks a little bit like taking pills, and she considers maybe those aren't mints. When her dog is growling at the basement door, she explores that full primal fear of the basement that she has, that most of us have, when it comes to feeling like there's some kind of a presence down in the dark below the stairs as we run up. I'm sure, I know every single one of you has experienced that feeling where you have to check over your shoulder and make sure that nothing followed you up those stairs. I know that. If you say that didn't happen to you, you're lying. I think what probably trips people up when reading Eve is that a lot of these fears are explored rather than just passing thoughts like they are for the rest of us. And to me, this just really reads to me as someone who's extremely anxious and very unregulated. And this is something that Eve very much is. And we see this, you know, she talks about using therapy tactics to calm down, where she's thinking about things that she can see, things that she can feel, things that she can hear, following all of her senses to ground her in that moment. We very much know that this is an aspect of Eve, and it just really reads that way to me. I think she was a really well-written, highly anxious person. And to be fair, she has some reasonable things to be at least unnerved about, right? She's got these strangers in her house, and at this point her partner Charlie is about a half hour late coming home, and she can't get a hold of her. That's kind of my thoughts on a personal level for Eve, but I do also see that there's a writing side of this, right? You can't start the energy of the book at 100 and keep going, because then there's nowhere to grow from there. But I didn't really feel that we started at 100 with Eve. I think we started at like 50, 65, somewhere in that range, and we still had a lot of room to grow. And we definitely passed that 100 threshold. And it might seem like there's not as much room to grow with the fear state if you start so high already, but for me, this really worked, because with her being as fearful and jumpy as she is from the get-go, it kind of turns into this mutual game of gaslighting, where she's being really jumpy about a lot of things. Like her dog growling at the basement door, it seemed like maybe the dog was just growling at an ant that was crawling on the door frame, and the dog really hates bugs. And so she like talks herself down, like, wow, that was something kind of ridiculous to get worked up about, okay, so I won't get worked up about that. But then as increasingly weird things start happening, she keeps trying to convince herself that it isn't as weird or scary or uncomfortable or anxiety inducing as it is. And as things continue to get weirder, then Thomas starts to sort of play into this and explain things away and be like, why do you think this is so weird? And kind of gaslighting her right back. And so because she's been accepting all of these things that really were making her uncomfortable, she starts to kind of play into that gaslighting and think, oh, maybe I am overreacting. And it gets to a point where she starts brushing off things that you wouldn't expect her to brush off. And I think that that progression makes so much sense. And you'll see what I mean as I go on. At what is presumably the end of the tour, Thomas goes up to the basement door and tries to open it, but Eve had just locked it after her dog was growling at it and it made her uncomfortable. And Thomas goes, oh, can we tour the basement? Would that be okay? And she puts her foot down and she says, you know what? No, it's dangerous down there. There's a lot of stuff around, which is true. There's just a lot of extra tools from the previous owner and stuff. She says, nope, we're not going to tour the basement. You guys, that's all. You can go now. And so he sends his family off to go get their coats and boots back on, but he sticks around, follows Eve into the kitchen a little bit. She's not exactly sure why. Then he pretty tentatively says to her, have you guys noticed anything strange? And before he finishes his thought, his kids start fighting and he has to go off and deal with that. Now, I have some thoughts about him starting this question that I can't really share at this point, but we'll wrap back around to them. But right about now, as Thomas is rejoining his family, they notice that Jenny is missing. They go around looking for her and they discover that in one of the bedrooms there was a previously sealed over dumbwaiter entrance. It had like a wallpaper of it and everything, and it is now open. And so they assume that since she had wanted to see the basement when Thomas suggested it, she used the dumbwaiter to get into the basement. Thomas then reveals that she just randomly does this. She'll just run off and hide, and the bigger their reaction is, the longer she will hide from them. And I'm really confused by this. I don't know. I don't have a 7-year-old, but this just feels super odd to me. I feel like maybe little kids would try hiding. I don't know. 7 is still kind of young. I don't know. This felt like a very odd thing to me in like just a normal way. Like the parts of it that I feel like were maybe meant to be normal, or maybe more of it was meant to be confusing and I was confused correctly. I don't know. But as a result of this, like we can't all go look for her as a group for some reason. And so only Thomas and Eve go into the basement to look for her. Now, Thomas tells her that they have to sneak up on Jenny because if she sees them, then she will keep running and hide even harder. And so they have to sneak up on her and just grab her and then haul her upstairs. And again, I'm just wondering what 7-year-old intentionally hides in a creepy basement of strangers and has to be like hauled out. I don't know, maybe there are 7-year-olds out there like that, but this just baffling to me. But it's starting to be baffling in a way that's like, what's up with this family? I just kind of started to wonder if it really was Jenny that they were chasing. This whole section about her hiding is just filled with contradictions and it's so unnerving. First, he has Eve and him go look for Jenny together, but then they have to split up and he says you have to sneak up on her or she'll run, right? And you have to just grab her and go. But as it goes, surely enough, he does claim to have found her, but just sort of points to this dark nook that they can't really see the end of. She's in there, we just can't see her, and doesn't really have solid proof for this. Eventually he does do the shave and a haircut knock, that dun 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 dun, and then they hear a dun dun in response, which I guess is some call in return that they do. But that takes like a while for him to do that. He just kind of expects Eve to believe him. Then Eve suggests, well, if she's in there, I'm pretty small, I can probably sneak in there and grab her and we can get her upstairs and go. But Thomas says, you know what, there's no point, we should just leave her, because if you try and grab her, she'll kick and scream and bite. You can't really just grab her and pull her out of there, it'll be too difficult. Which is a big contradiction to the whole grab her and go concept from earlier on. This contradiction does not elude Eve, which I really appreciate. She's very tuned in to the horror that happens in this book. But yeah, Thomas is just like, you know, we just need to wait her out. Once she gets sick of this hiding place, she won't hide again, she'll just come right up. Which, again, super contradicts what he said before, because he said that she would just keep hiding before and they needed to like physically pull her out of the space. Why did they go down looking for her anyway, rather than just wait for her to turn up? You know, all of these pieces just aren't clicking. And during all of the finding process, yet another unnerving thing happens. Eve and Thomas split up, right? And Eve rounds a corner at one point and comes up on Thomas from behind, and he's just standing stiff as a board. She calls to him a couple of times and he does not respond. And she she's getting pretty freaked out. Like, why are you not responding? And the way he's standing is really unnerving. But he does finally snap out of it, and when he does, it seems like he didn't know that happened at all. He was just like, oh, you snuck up on me. It's super eerie, but just in the slightest way, right? Like, so easy to brush off, like, oh, maybe he didn't hear me coming. But right around here, Charlie, Eve's partner, finally comes home. Eve is so relieved to see her. Charlie is obviously surprised to see strangers in her home, but she kind of takes it in stride. She's joking with them, asking them about Thomas's experience living in the house, and invites them all to stay for dinner while they wait for Jenny to come up. Throughout this entire time, though, Eve is obviously very unnerved, and Charlie is super oblivious to it. Her inviting them over for dinner, making Eve super uncomfortable, she did not even notice that. And so eventually Eve just pulls her aside and is like, hey, these people have been weird. And Charlie's like, oh, weird how? And it's one of those things that Eve can't explain in any kind of detail. And Charlie isn't one of those people that just kind of accepts the vibe is off. She's like, oh, well, okay, do you want me to tell him to go, I guess? And at that point, Eve feels bad and declines, so they stay for dinner. But outside, the snow has picked up to a blizzard, and everyone is suddenly aware that the weather is a lot worse than they thought it was. And Jenny comes up the stairs. She's scolded by her parents and is crying about how sorry she is. And now that they have Jenny in tow, the whole family starts to pack up, put their snow boots and coats back on. You're starting to feel some relief, but Eve feels that she can't feel relieved until they are fully out of the house. And in that way, I felt she was a very relatable protagonist. That is exactly how I would feel in that instance. And in another relatable move, when they do all finally walk out that door, which they do, she closes the door, locks it behind them, and puts her back against it and sighs in relief. But just as she is starting to feel fully relaxed, Charlie shows her a notification on her phone. The only bridge going in and out of their neighborhood has been closed due to the severe weather. And it cuts from that to them putting the family up for the night. Oh, that was such a horrible feeling to know they're doomed, the family is coming back, but also why? Like, I know that it's the only bridge in and out of town, but like, there are other people up the lane, make them go to their houses. Obviously, you're the people who they've been talking to, so they're gonna come back to your house when they're stuck, but like, I don't know, turn off the lights and pretend you're not home. So, as I said, they put the family up for the night. They give them a room upstairs. They put them in the office. They're all bundled up in sleeping bags, headed to bed for the night. And Eve and Charlie stay up after that talking. And can I just say, Charlie is weirdly dismissive about Eve's concerns with this family. Like, I get that Eve doesn't have that many concrete things to point out to her partner to be like, yeah, they're kind of weird. But even when she brings up, like, Thomas just freezing solid in the basement, like, that's weird, right? Like, even if you misinterpreted it, even if he didn't hear you coming, like, I feel like most people hearing their partner be freaked out about that would be like, yeah, that's really weird. That, I can see that would make you really uncomfortable. It would make me feel weird. And like, Eve explains that she overreacts to things a lot, but I just don't think that justifies Charlie's reaction to this. Is basically like, oh, so he just couldn't hear you. So what? She really doesn't entertain the idea that it was the uncomfortable thing, you know? The whole thing just kind of makes it hard for me to feel like a fan of Charlie as a person or a partner for Eve. But as they're talking, they hear a sound from the front of the house and their dog Shiloh starts growling. At first they think it's a knock on the door, but the front door is just fully open. And as they look outside, Thomas is out there kneeling in the snow. As they come up to him trying to figure out why he's out there without a coat, kneeling in the snow, they hear him whimpering, saying, no, I'm sorry. And the way that the audiobook narrator narrated this point was incredible. The description says that he sounded like a child apologizing for something, very much gone back to a childhood state in this moment. But the way that the narrator read this, she read it exactly the same as Jenny apologizing for hiding in the basement. And that made it so unnerving. They end up shaking him out of the state that he's in and figure out that it was sort of a sleepwalking dream state that he had been in. This is the first time that he's sleptwalked in decades, which, you know, definitely makes you wonder. He's back in his childhood home, familiar locations. Could the house have caused him to start sleepwalking again? As they're discussing all of this, Eve asks him what he meant earlier when he started to say, have you noticed anything weird in the house? And he sort of sheepishly starts to talk about his experience living there when he was 8 years old. He talks about how he and his parents and his older sister Allison lived in that house together. And one day Allison looked at this coat hanger that they had and asked where it came from because it hadn't been there before. And they all looked at her and said, no, that's always been there. What are you talking about? And she said, well, the coat hanger's been there, but it used to be white, not gray, right? They all look at each other really surprised. No, of course it's always been gray. What are you talking about? And she sort of drops it. But a few days later, she starts talking about how a painting appeared in her room while she was sleeping, and she's trying to figure out who put it in there while she was asleep. But again, they look at each other and say, that painting? That one's been there for years. Your mom painted that. And this sort of thing just kept happening. And he said that Allison said that she felt like the house itself was trying to mess with her. Eventually, she starts to feel like things about her parents are changing. Her family are being swapped out with other people. Surely they are. And Thomas says this eerie sentence, that people she knew became strangers, and strangers became familiar. That gives me the chills every time. Super spooky. And that's kind of where Thomas leaves the story, other than saying that he felt responsible for what happened, despite being only 8 years old. He feels like there was more he could do to help her. He doesn't explain what it is that happened, but he does say that part of the reason of coming back was some kind of hope inside of him that coming back would give him closure and help him understand what happened. In the end, he says no closure really came. It's just an old house. And I have so much I want to say about why he's saying this and what he's saying, but again, we have to hold off until a little bit later in the story. So bear with me. Hang on to this thought with me. After this conversation, they all head off to bed, and Eve has a nightmare that wakes her up at around 3 a.m. She heads downstairs to get a glass of water and clear her head, and she passes the office that the family's in, and it looks like they're all sort of in there. She goes down to the kitchen, gets herself a glass of water, and notices that the door to the basement is open. When Jenny originally came up from the basement, she talked about how she lost her pen down there. So she's worried that Jenny went back down there in the middle of the night to find her pen, since they wouldn't let her go back down initially. This part is so creepy. Eve calls down the stairs for Jenny to see if she's down there, and initially she hears nothing. She tries a couple of more times, but doesn't really hear anything. And then she remembers that Thomas did the shave and haircut knock to get a response from her, so she turns to the side of the stairwell and goes, knock, 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 knock. Doesn't seem like she hears anything. But then, softly, faintly, she hears a return knock. Now, if I'm being completely transparent, this is the moment when I lost my shit. Nope, no. Absolutely not. Even just now, reliving this moment in so much detail, I am shivering. It's one thing to like call down into this creepy basement that you haven't even fully explored yourself and just be like, Jenny, are you down there? Calling down with someone's name specifically. But to do an unnamed call like that is universally accepted as like a call waiting for a return, and the return could be given by anything. Just absolutely not. That return knock. Like, imagine, okay, just sit with me in this moment that you're like at your parents' house, you're looking down the stairs and you know that no one is down there, and you knock on the wall, knock, 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 and you hear a return. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Nope, that's an eldritch demon. Burn the whole place down. I'm gearing up. I'm like, I have such goosebumps right now talking about this because it gets so much worse, okay? Because she hears this return, right? And so she's like, Jenny, is that you? And she can't see really anything toward the bottom of the staircase and into the basement. So she's about to go and get a flashlight when she starts to make out a bit of a figure at the bottom of the staircase. It looks like a silhouette of a child against the darkness of the basement. And this silhouette is standing perfectly still. Again, she calls to her, doesn't get any response. And so she tries to bribe the curious Jenny and says, Jenny, if you come upstairs, your dad will tell you more secrets about the house. And again, it doesn't respond in any way, except this time to slightly tilt its head. Now, right about now, Eve starts to be able to make out Jenny's eyes. They're unblinking. And just as she notices that they haven't been blinking this entire time, the figure starts to rise. It's rising and rising, and she realizes this was not a child silhouette. This was someone who was crouched down. And as they continue standing up, they stand well above 6 feet tall. They are a gaunt, kind of creepy, spindly figure. Eve jumps up, slams the door, runs up the stairs. My heart took flight with her. We're running. We are running all the way up to the 2nd story. She goes into her room. As she passes, she sees the family in the office. They are all there. They are all asleep. That is not one of them. She goes into her room with Charlie. She closes the door. She jumps on Charlie, screaming, "There is someone in the basement." At this point, I need them to run. Oh my gosh, I am questioning all of my life choices. Why did I read this book? I'm gonna die. We're all gonna die. They need to run. This is such a horrifying childhood nightmare brought to life in the most frightening way. It was insane. Now, Charlie has been shaken awake and is groggy and asks if the person in the basement was one of the children. And Eve is like, no, it was not. She's like, well, was it one of the adults then? No, this was not one of them. This is an intruder. This is a separate person. She even specifies she saw the whole family in the office. They are all still asleep. And Charlie has the nerve to ask about her seeing this figure at the bottom of the staircase. Was it dark? And Eve has the exact reaction that I would have. I know what I saw. And after that insane question, and then very reasonable response, in my opinion, Charlie has the nerve to say, can we deal with this in the morning? No, we can't, Charlie. We cannot deal with this in the morning. What do you mean, can we deal with this in the morning? There's an intruder in your house. She's trying to explain to Eve, no, I believe you. I just don't believe you enough to go traipsing around the house at 3 a.m. I'm sorry. No, there is no way you believe Eve, because are you really the kind of person, Charlie, who can hear that there is an intruder in your house and want to go back to sleep with them in your house, still in your house? No, absolutely not. You have lost me, Charlie. I cannot connect to you as a person. If it were me, I would be in the car. I'd be long gone. Charlie can sleep in that house with an intruder if she wants, but I am out of there. Now, Eve obviously pushes back against this idea of going back to sleep with an intruder in the house, as I think is very, very reasonable to push back against. And she's like, hey, no, we should probably deal with this. But Charlie is relentless. So eventually Eve just relents. But then she's like, you know what? No, that's an insane idea. We need to deal with this now. But right as she's about to say this, Charlie has fully fallen asleep on her. Now, it goes on to explain how Charlie can fall asleep anywhere, anytime, any place, on the drop of a hat. That's not the explanation for me, I'm sorry, because I am that partner. I can fall asleep anywhere. I can fall asleep at any time. If I want to, I will just be asleep, even if I don't want to sometimes. It's not always blessing. But here's the deal. If someone woke me up with that news, there is no way I am falling back asleep. I'm sorry, someone says there's an intruder in my house? No, I'm not gonna fall asleep that quickly. Either I'm still kind of half asleep and don't believe them, and I fall asleep, or there's no way I'm falling asleep. So Charlie falling asleep, she clearly didn't believe her partner. And in which case, she was lying to Eve by saying she believed her. And so at this moment, I am not Team Charlie. No, absolutely not Team Charlie. But Eve, rather than shaking her partner awake again, which is what I would have done as the annoying, terrified partner that I am, she decides to just lock the bedroom door and huddle in the bed, trying to figure out what to do. And eventually, after thinking and overthinking it all, she fades off to sleep. And again, lest I reiterate this too much, this could not be me. No, there would be no sleep. There would only be wakefulness. There would be wakefulness and there would be police in my house. And I would be out of that house. Wow, such an unrelatable moment. But I digress. And when she wakes up, Charlie is gone. She is not next to her. Eve goes downstairs to see if Charlie is down there and finds the family quite at home in her kitchen making breakfast. When questioned, Thomas says that Charlie let them use the kitchen and Charlie had to go into town for an urgent meeting. And also that she said something about the basement being clear, whatever it is that means. Not one to take Thomas's word for it, Eve goes to call Charlie and realizes that her phone is not in her pocket. It's also not anywhere to be found. In the chaos of trying to find her phone and just what is going on, she snaps at Thomas, "What are you still doing here?" And fair enough. And Thomas says, "Don't worry, we're leaving after breakfast, I swear." Now she asks to borrow a phone from Thomas, and he says that they don't have any. They turned their phones in to their pastor for a digital fast. Whatever, they don't have phones. Okay, Eve is taking it in stride at this point. Whatever, they're weird. She decides, that's it. I'm heading outside, I'm going to the neighbor's house, and I'm gonna call Charlie from there. Oh, and just before she does this, she finds Charlie's necklace. Charlie, yesterday, came home with a locket around her neck that she hadn't had before, and it had a picture of Eve on the inside. Eve is famously photo shy, and she was like, ooh, this is the only known photo of Eve Palmer. It was a very cute moment and a romantic gesture. And Eve now sees this locket hanging from a nail on the mantle. Nails that she had just removed yesterday. What's going on there? That's part of what triggers her to go, nope, I'm calling Charlie. She heads out, follows that primal urge to get out. She heads down the path, and despite all the snow, is able to find the neighbor's house. She sees the numbers on the road, and it was supposed to be 3708, she thought, but there it is, 3707. Did she have that wrong? She goes up to knock on the door, and there's no response. And after a moment, one of the lights that was on in one of the rooms turns off. She takes this as kind of a rude, passive rejection and turns to go, only to find an old woman, the owner of the house, behind her. The woman does let Eve into the house, and she tells her to follow this hallway and turn and enter a room, and that's where the phone will be. Eve uses the rotary phone and tries to call Charlie. And she does eventually get through, but it sounds like Charlie is annoyed and frustrated that Eve is calling her. She tries to communicate with Charlie, but the call ends up cutting off. And when she tries to call her back, she doesn't get through. She then hears a shuffling behind her, and the old woman is crouched in the corner of the room. And I would have been out of there. I would have screamed so bad, but she notices that the old woman is she's just straightening some stuff in the corner of the room. It's nothing nefarious. She's just going about her business. But the woman does mention that she heard her talk on the phone about someone named Thomas, because she was talking to Charlie about Thomas. She was like, is there any chance that that's the Thomas who used to live there? And she's like, well, yeah, it actually was. They talk about Thomas a little bit in the history of what happened in that house. Eve gets out of her that something horrible happened in that house. She explains that Allison did go through everything that Thomas told her that she went through, where she thought everyone was fake. But she continues the story saying Allison thought that the only way back to her reality was to get rid of Thomas, and she stabbed him 13 times in the face with a fountain pen. And the image of that rightfully absolutely disturbs Eve. So they sit with this for a while, and then they keep talking about the house. Eve at one point mentions that she's looking for more history into the house because the bank mentioned that there was a fire at town hall and they lost a lot of the paperwork on the house. And the old woman sort of snaps at her. She says, it's a lie. Some loony broke into town hall and pilfered all of the papers. But then she sort of trails off and says people started talking about it being a fire, and even she and her late husband would argue about whether it was a fire or someone who had broken into it. And she ends the thought with, sometimes people remember things wrong. Also, at some point in this conversation between Eve and the elderly neighbor woman, there's a thud in the house that the woman doesn't respond to, but both Eve and her dog perk up and hear it. So she knows it's not just her. The dog heard it as well. Then the woman goes off to make her a cup of tea, and Eve sees eyes in the couch. And this description, terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Doesn't turn out as terrifying as that, because what she finds is not a person, thank goodness. It is an old stuffed monkey. Now, the description of this monkey is more relevant than you would think, because something that I've neglected to mention throughout this entire book is that the voice of anxiety, the voice of fear in Eve's head has been, thanks to some psychiatrist's advice when she was younger, she's ascribed it to this toy monkey that she had called Mo. Now, it was one of those like really creepy, huge grin monkeys that would like slam the cymbals, but it had a straw hat instead of the regular garb and was gray instead of brown. It's like this super off-brand version of the regular monkey. And she called it Mo, and at some point a psychiatrist was like, you should assign these voices to something innocuous, and so she assigned it to this monkey. And so often as she's having these fears in her mind, she verbalizes it as Mo saying these things to her. And what she sees in the couch of this elderly neighbor's house is Mo. She pulls him up. It looks a lot like him. It isn't actually Mo, but it reminds her a lot of it. And it looking so much like Mo makes her think about how she lost Mo. She was driving with her family, just she and her parents, and Mo was in the seat next to her, all buckled in like kids do with their stuffed animals. They went out at a gas station to get snacks. She got back in the car and Mo was just gone. The seatbelt was still buckled in and everything. She freaked out saying Mo had been kidnapped, Mo had been stolen, and there was no way they could find this monkey again. In fact, they couldn't figure out how to buy this monkey again. I have questions about this monkey because he's turning back up here, right? And he disappeared when she was a child, which makes it feel like there's some sort of a connection going on from when she was a kid. And I have great questions about that, and I don't know that we really get the answer about this, but I will follow back up on this thought later. After the woman comes back in with the tea, they talk a little bit more, and the phone rings down the hallway. She says, oh, that must be your partner, because my phone doesn't ring very often. People don't call me that often. And Eve starts to go down the hallway toward it. But she notices something is weird. Something's a little bit different. And she figures it out. One of the doors is cracked just a little bit. She thinks about the light turning off earlier. She thinks about the thud, and she cannot bring herself to go down that hallway. The phone is still ringing. The older woman is like, aren't you gonna get it? But she feels like there's eyes looking at her through the crack in this doorway, and she lets the phone ring out. Unable to explain why or what she's doing, she says, I've got to go. I have to go home. So she takes Shiloh and she books it out of there. And I can't say that I don't understand. You know, I think I would have convinced myself to go down that hallway, but I too would have been just as terrified. As she's walking home, though, she sees the truck that Thomas and his family drove in on. They did in fact drive in a car. They didn't walk out of the woods like she was afraid they did, but it's still there, which means they are still there. She starts to get frustrated with it, and then she sees someone standing by the truck. She can't decide who it is. Maybe it's Jenny, maybe it's the mom, maybe it's even Charlie. She's quite a distance away. She can't quite tell, but this person is not dressed for the weather. And they take off into the woods, and she thinks, ah, crap. Now, it's described as she's just worried about them not being dressed for the weather, and so she takes off after them. But after everything that's been going on, honestly, I kind of find that explanation hard to believe. So I wrote in my own explanation. That is, if this is Jenny, who's just taken off into the woods, the family can't leave until they find her again, so she has to go after her. That's my explanation for why Eve chased after her, because the one in the book doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, she's running through the woods chasing after this person. At some points she can see the woman, and at other times she just sees footprints in the snow that she's following, and she eventually opens out into this clearing, and the footsteps stop entirely. Like the person just evaporated into thin air. The footsteps are there and they end. And she looks up into this clearing, and there's an A-frame cabin, an old rackety A-frame cabin in the middle of this clearing. And this cabin feels like it's watching her. She's about to get out of there when Shiloh inexplicably runs all the way up to this cabin and in the front door. And you know what? At this point, leave the dog. Okay, no, I don't mean leave the dog. Obviously, I wouldn't. But also, the dog just made its choice, in my opinion. No, I would go in after my dog, but like, me and that dog would have words. She does obviously decide to go in after her dog. And as she's mounting the porch steps, she sees carved into the porch, old house. She isn't sure what that means, but she heads inside. And as she's walking through, there are just some things about the house that are a little bit eerie. Like the tile floor is that black and white tile that was covered up with the wood floor in her house. And the wind slams the door closed behind her. She finds Shiloh, turns around to leave, and sees this massive conspiracy wall. So much bigger than you imagine from that one meme.
Take a look at this.
And in this moment, the words that ring out in her brain are, some nut broke into town hall and pilfered the paperwork. The words that her neighbor had just said. And the book is kind enough to feed us some of the lines that are on this wall. There's paperwork everywhere. There are red lines pointing here and there. There's maps, but there are also notes scrawled all across. And the little snippets that we get are so confusing and also such an interesting piece of this book. So it starts off, if you followed the directions properly up to this point, Red Lake will be bone dry. At its deepest point, there will be a steel hatch that leads to a house of refuge. A middle-aged woman will be there to provide further instructions. If her son has passed away in the last year, leave immediately and backtrack your route to the last house of refuge. Ensure the woman does not follow. Host, who lives beneath the Civil War Museum, can transfer his memories by making eye contact. Highly unstable individual. Be careful in his presence. The anchor of 129 Orello Avenue takes the form of a blue nightstand when observed. Time moves slower in the Brenda mines. This exit leads to a red sun overworld. The guide in Lonsdale is a fraud. Do not listen to a word he says, etc. Now, all of this sounds like chaos and feels just a little bit too tied in to what we are talking about. And that will only increase. But then, as she's walking out of this room, suddenly there's a man in the house. And he says, "You're not supposed to be here." As she turns to leave, she sees him in the light, and he's old, scraggly, his skin tight on his bones, and scarred face. She is not leaving fast enough for his taste. He keeps telling her, "Please leave, just leave." And she is already basically running out that door. And he says, "Wait, those people in your house, that's not what they look like. Get them to leave by whatever means necessary. And then he goes back inside the house. So that was a haunting encounter. At this point in the book, you're just like, okay, chaos is happening. Chaos is definitely happening. And I don't know what any of it means. And it's at this very moment that the notes in the book change. I mentioned at the beginning of my review that this book uses sort of multimedia snippets to add additional context to what's happening. And throughout the entire book, it does this just by putting a little snippet in between chapters. So sometimes it's just like, this movie is playing at this time that was relevant for a tiny reason. And that's what most of them have been up until now, just kind of vague padding for what has been happening in the book so far, such as a real estate listing from when they bought the house. And right here and now, these notes change dramatically. Like there was a report about the fire at town hall after it was briefly mentioned, or a Reddit conversation about a toy monkey like Mo that is slightly different from the regular symbol holding monkey, and then a conversation about people saying that never existed, but other people have asked about it before. This being placed right after Mo is first mentioned. But now, what are these cushions between chapters now? We get the first of some very interesting pieces of information. Right after she sees this conspiracy wall, we get an annotated set of notes called Old House. Now, as I said, it's annotated notes, and it's almost like the annotator is having a conversation with you about what the author has written. For example, the author lists these foreign species of plants and animals that are popping up around the house, and the annotator remarks that the specific examples mentioned have no record of being in that area. But aside from that, it's not uncommon for colonial people in America to take plants with them from England to America, so that could have happened in Oregon as well. The author continues to describe this bizarre species of tropical ants that are from an island in the Pacific Ocean. The annotator cuts in saying those ants don't exist. The author says they were discovered by a certain anthropologist, and the annotator says such a person has never existed. The author continues that the entire island was destroyed by a volcanic eruption after he left, but the ants could potentially have been transported via his ship to this house. The author continues these ants are extinct because of that volcanic explosion, and they wouldn't have even known that that's what these ants near the old house were if it weren't for notes from this anthropologist that had been discovered at the bottom of the ocean in a watertight container. The annotator cuts back in saying that there's no record of those notes, of this happening, or of these ants existing at all. The old house notes then include this very interesting list. Now, this is a little bit long, so hang with me if you don't really care about the secrets of what's going on, because I consider this to be pretty important information for that. But if you don't care, you're just here for the horror, you can keep going to this timestamp, but I'm going to read this list to you. It says, host, person who has been trapped or willfully residing in the house for more than 1 year. If trapped longer than a month, it is practically impossible to escape. Guest, person who has been trapped for less than a year. Guide, person who has intimate knowledge of more than one old house wing and can safely bring tourists in without getting lost and or trapped. Hopefully. Tourist, person who enters old house under the ward of a guide, hopefully generally for exploratory or personal reasons, and generally spends less than a week inside. Many tourists unwittingly become guests and or hosts. Trespasser, someone who enters old house without guide, usually by accident or nefarious intent, either for monetary gain or otherwise. Anchor, also known as trickster, spirit, demon, entity, presence, specter, etc. Either a non-human entity or host who has been trapped for so long they are essentially no longer human. Some are neutral, some are helpful. Some are incredibly dangerous. Anchor motives are often incomprehensible. Seems like some feed on terror or confusion and or chaos. Hatch, any structure or entrance, man-made or otherwise, that can be used to enter or exit old house. Shortcut, exactly that, used to jump locations. Extremely high risk. Hook, room or section of old house that is impossible to escape without ritual replacement. It continues, the longer someone is trapped in old house, the more dangerous they become to themselves or others. Some claim the symptoms akin to radiation sickness or psychosis can occur. Hearing loss, vomiting, hallucination, extreme paranoia, etc. So, that is what we see in these in-between chapters. Like I said, it's getting really interesting. What does all of this mean? We're starting to get pieces. You can piece some things together. You can also decide whether this is relevant to anything. Obviously, I think it is. Anyway, after the chapter break, we get back to Eve, who has just arrived back at her house, and the front door is locked. She reaches into her pockets and discovers she doesn't have her keys. She swears she brought them, but they aren't with her. So she starts knocking on the front door, knocking on the windows frantically. No one is letting her in. She can't can't decide if this means that the family has left and she's locked herself out completely alone, or if they're inside not letting her in. But Thomas eventually does sheepishly open the front door and apologize for having locked it. Now, at this point, she has had it up to here with them. She's like, you guys need to go. You said you'd be gone after breakfast. You are not gone. Get gone. And Thomas says, well, we thought about leaving when you were gone, but we didn't want to leave your house unlocked. And the weather's kind of gotten bad since then. So I don't know if we can do that. We don't really have snow tires. And she's like, no, you are getting out of here. Charlie told me that there are chains up in this attic for tires. I will go and get them. So she marches up to the attic. The entire time that she's in the attic, there's this drip, drip, drip of water dripping from a particular pipe and hitting the floor. And it lays such an eerie backdrop for this scene. The attic is a lot bigger than you would think because it's the attic for the entire house. And so she makes her way around through what would be one room downstairs and then down this corridor, which is where Charlie said has the tire chains. So she follows this passage, she finds the tire chains, and she finds herself at a window out the front of the attic. She sees in the windowsill carving in the same hand as at the old house, the A-frame cabin in the woods. This inscription doesn't say old house. It says, remember which house you're in. Which? What? And as she's turning to go, she hears from further in the attic this loud metallic screeching that she eventually figures out is the dumbwaiter arriving in the attic. She walks slowly around the corner and sees the dumbwaiter empty. She's relieved there's no one crammed inside of there, as was her vicious, anxious fear. But there are wet footprints walking away from it. And of course, they're between her and the exit to the attic, which, hate that. And just then, her flashlight winks out. She tries to get it to turn on again by hitting it against her hand, and it flashes on and then it flashes off. She hits it against the wall and it doesn't turn on. And when final feeling of frustration, she throws it across the attic. Now in the utter darkness, she runs towards where the hatch to the attic is. She can see the light coming up it. She runs, she gets there, and just as she gets there, it slams shut. She is totally panicking, but she decides to take this moment to focus on things that she can see and smell and feel and calm herself down. And if I'm being completely honest with you, this was not the moment. There are footprints in the attic, fresh footprints. Someone is up there with you. This is not the moment to calm down. That panic is trying to get you out of there. You need to work with that panic, not against it. But as she's listening to the sounds around her, she notices the dripping sound has stopped, like it did when she was standing under it. Is someone standing under it? At this point, she is clawing at the hatch, trying to get it open. And then there's a light. Her flashlight is rolling toward her in a wide arc and stops just short of this dark alcove. Her eyes take a second to adjust, and there's a figure in the dark alcove. I have lost it at this point. It is a woman who's like 6 feet tall, gaunt, wearing a hospital robe, and her hands in front of her eyes like peekaboo hands. Or you think of it as a weeping angel if you're me, because you watched too much Doctor Who in high school. Just kidding, there's no such thing as too much Doctor Who. Needless to say, I am panicking. She is panicking, I'm panicking more. She is pounding on the door to the hatch, screaming, and the woman starts taking shuddering, freezing steps toward her, and they get faster and faster, and the flashlight blinks out, and she is screaming and pounding on that door, and then the door opens, she falls and hits her head on the banister. After this, Eve wakes up on the couch with Thomas and his wife around her, just kind of vaguely concerned. And she's like, what happened? Like, probably concussed. They're like, well, you were screaming in the attic, so we opened the door and you fell and hit your head. She's like, I was screaming? Yeah, you said there was someone up there. And all of a sudden, all the memories come back. And she's freaking out, as I think is very deserved. And then she hears her phone chime. That phone she hasn't been able to find. It's coming from upstairs, so she runs upstairs to get that phone because for crying out loud, she needs connection to the outside world. And she runs in, following the noise of her phone, into this room, and the oldest son, she sees it in his hand and he hides it away. She wrestles him for it. It's a full-on tackle. They're brawling. And then Shiloh gets involved and bites the boy and won't let go. They're all freaking out. The whole family's come in because of the ruckus, and everyone's trying to get Shiloh off this boy's leg, and Shiloh will not get off. Eventually, he kicks the dog and poor Shiloh goes flying. Eve now has the phone in her hand, and as an explanation, she shows it to them. And it isn't her phone. But she saw it. She heard it. She saw the cracked screen. She saw the phone background. This was her phone. But it's the eldest son's phone. Now, because the oldest son was bit by a dog, they all start to leave to head to the hospital after saying many rude things to Eve about her dog. And as Eve goes to exit this room where she's just wrestled a child for her phone, she realizes that the stained glass window in this room is gone. Not like the window is gone, just the stained glass. It's been replaced with an ordinary window. And she looks closely at it because obviously she's freaking out about it. And everything about it feels like it's always been there. There's no dust from having scraped out an old window and put a new one in. There's no raw materials. The caulk is old. It is not new. The window looks time period accurate, like it has always lived in this house. Before she can fully appreciate what this even means, Shiloh has run off, so she goes to follow Shiloh and hears a whimper coming from the basement. So she goes down into the dreaded basement after her dog. She looks around, she calls for Shiloh, and then she turns around and Shiloh is at the top of the stairs. But she knows she heard a whimper from in the basement. But then the dumbwaiter moves and she goes, I don't care if I heard a whimper in the basement. I'm out of here. Runs up to the top of the stairs, closes and locks the door, which I very much approve of. But not only does she do that great choice, she grabs the dog and she runs outside. She is fully out of that house. Thank goodness, Eve. As she gets outside, she sees that Charlie has pulled up in her vehicle alongside the family in their truck and they're talking window to window. And Charlie is nodding slowly like she's taking something in. The little voice in the back of her head, personified by the creepy monkey Mo, says, they're talking about you. He's convincing her to get you institutionalized. Eve tries to ignore this and the family drives off. Eve runs up to Charlie in the car, hops inside, gets Shiloh inside, and closes the door. Eve and Charlie talk and Charlie explains what Thomas told her, and it's basically the events that happened. And Charlie seems concerned in the right way. Thank goodness. But even still, Eve is struggling to explain what on earth is going on. So she picks one detail. She asks Charlie if there's a stained glass window in the study. She says, yes, it's a tree. Of course there's a stained glass window in the study. Eve just leaves it at that and says, we need to get out of here. We cannot stay the night here. We need to go somewhere else. And Charlie says, okay, I can see something is going on. We will go somewhere else. But she pulls up to the house and says, well, of course I have to get my stuff. I need my phone charger. Eve is freaking out. She's like, no, do not go in that house. We can get you another phone charger. There is no reason to do this. We need to go. Charlie's like, there's no reason to not go get my bag. I know you're upset. I'm just gonna go get it. And they go back and forth like this for a while. In fact, they go back and forth on this for so long that Eve gives up out of exhaustion, sheer exhaustion over everything that's been happening. And again, Charlie, I just don't get you. I have known people who are that stubborn, who will do a thing that they have said that they will do because they want to, regardless of whether it hurts someone or whatever, because they said they would, they wanted to, they're just going to do that thing. They don't care what you have to say. I've met people like that, but I don't typically tend to keep them in my life very long because that's a person who cannot be reasoned with and potentially has some empathy concerns in my opinion. At any rate, I wouldn't date them. So I'm so baffled by this Charlie character. She does, in fact, go in. She packs up, she takes a while, and when she comes out, she gets in the car and is a little bit rattled. And she says, the window changed. She's trying to explain it, but she's clearly spooked. She's like, maybe they took it. And Eve's like, and they replaced it with another window? What motivation would they have for this? I don't know. So Charlie is starting to understand the freaky nature of what is happening. Now we get another clip in between chapters, and it's an interview of a kid who said he and his friends broke into the old house. It was abandoned, and they did it on a dare. And in the basement, they found this long hospital corridor and someone at the end saying, my name is not, but nothing else. He says he never saw this person. He was too freaked out, but his friend was standing there frozen in fear, and he left his friend behind. He ran out. He could not bear to be there. It was too terrifying. The police officer then essentially asks this kid, what drugs were you and your friend on? Because first off, there are no signs that you broke into this house. We've checked the basement. Of course, there's no hospital corridor in the basement of this old house. Your friend is in a catatonic state in the other room, and the other friends that you said dared you, not only did we not find them there, but when we asked the school that you said you attended, their names and you and your friends' names were not on their list. In fact, we can't find record of you or your friend ever existing. So this isn't your name. What drugs are you on? Tell me the truth. The kid then looks into the camera in the corner of the room in an unblinking stare, and every viewer of this footage said it felt like something ancient staring into their souls through the camera, and then the footage cuts out. Now, all of this had been a description of someone who viewed this footage, and it comes with a note saying every single instance of this footage disappeared in 2013. It disappeared off of the internet, and even the police at the station where this happened have no record of this interview ever happening. The writer says, if I hadn't seen this footage myself, I wouldn't believe that this story or this footage ever existing were real. But back to the story. Eve and Charlie pull up to a motel. It's the motel in town that Eve was sure was out of business previously. At any rate, here it is, clearly in business. So they get a room. In the motel, Eve breaks down to Charlie all of her fears. She's been feeling like she might be going crazy, that maybe what happened to Allison is happening to her too. Now, Charlie is being super caring in this moment. It's a really great supportive moment where she's like, I saw the stained glass window too. This isn't you. Something weird is going on. If you were going mad, I would be the first person to tell you. This calms Eve down, and she's just starting to relax when she hears a voice that specifically isn't Mo this time in her head saying, it isn't her. This isn't Charlie. This removes the panic in her. She remembers family becoming strange and strangers becoming familiar. And so she turns to Charlie and says, how did we first meet? Charlie is trying to hide her offense at being basically suggested that she was replaced with someone else. She can pick up the pieces of what Eve is putting down. But she gets past that and starts to explain how they first met. And she explains it perfectly. Throughout this, Eve is relaxing more and more and feeling more and more comfortable. And at the end of it, she rushes over and hugs Charlie and feels safe for the first time in 24 hours. She knows that she isn't going to have to face this alone. They're in this together, and somehow it will be okay. The chapter ends with them going to sleep, and the next chapter starts with Eve being woken up in the middle of the night by a phone call coming in to Charlie's phone in her bag. So she goes over to see who's calling in the middle of the night, and it says Eve Palmer. Her phone. Someone has her phone back at the house or somewhere, and for reasons she can't fully explain, she goes into the bathroom by herself to pick up the phone, and the worst possible person is at the other end. It's Charlie. She says she's still at the house. The woman who left isn't her. Eve has to get away. She's going to do something. It cuts off, but she has to get away, run, never come back to the house. She's still in the house, but go. Never come back, get free. She even says the dog isn't Shiloh. The line then dies, and before Eve gets a chance to dial her back, Charlie is standing in the doorway of the bathroom, asking Eve what's wrong. Eve, obviously confused, terrified, is not sure what to do or say. So she makes up a lie. She says, the contractor needed something at 3 a.m. Well, it's kind of urgent. And just then she sees Charlie braced against the doorframe. She sees that her hand tattoo is gone. It's not there. No trace. Not like it was removed. It's never been there. And at that, Eve jumps up, grabs the keys to the car, and runs out the door. Charlie freaks out and starts trying to chase after her, wondering what's going on, but Eve does not care. She gets in the car and she floors it. She is headed anywhere. And then she realizes Charlie and Shiloh are in the house. They're her family. They are her life. They are the only things that matter to her. So she goes back to the house. She is roaring down the highway, and she almost hits a little girl in the middle of the road. So she swerves and stops and gets out to see what happened. And the little girl is now standing on the side of the road. She's standing still, and then she puts her arms out like this at an odd angle and holds them perfectly still, and then just charges at Eve. And obviously, Eve is having none of that and dodges. And the girl just runs past her into the woods. And Eve does the most relatable thing in this moment that I really appreciate. She literally thinks to herself, not my problem, gets back in the car and heads to the house. Again, I am Team Eve all the way. She makes all of the calls that I appreciate, because I too would be like, creepy girl chasing me down in the forest? Yeah, I'm not gonna see what that's about. I'm gonna go deal with my stuff. Anyway, Eve drives back to the house, and she goes in the front door. And I'm gonna be honest with you, from here on out, it is utter pandemonium, but you expected that, right? She went back in the house. The house is empty. It's dark. Everything looks exactly like she left it. She starts to question her reality again. Was anything wrong with the house? And then she hears Charlie weakly calling for her from upstairs. She runs up to the room where she heard Charlie's voice, only to find the woman in the hospital gown in there holding a hammer. She turns to her and says, "You need to hide," and starts walking toward her. Eve, obviously, does what a sane person would do, runs out of there. Eve runs to the front door, starts pulling on it. It will not budge. She's pounding on it. She goes to the window. The windows are all inexplicably barred. All of them. Every single window in this house. Then she hears the woman counting from upstairs. Counting down like a sick game of hide and seek, and she understands. So she runs down the stairs into the basement to hide. She runs through room after room, getting deeper and deeper into the basement, and then eventually she sees a portrait, a painted portrait of Thomas and his family of origin. There's a father who looks stern, a mother who looks sterner, Thomas and his sister Allison. While the parents and Allison all look normal, Thomas looks like he's been painted in later by a worse painter with worse paint. The proportions are just a little off. Captivated and confused, Eve looks around and in this same room finds a picture album of Allison and her parents, and they look so different in this one. The parents look young and happy. The dad has neck tattoos and wears metal band shirts and has a guitar. The mom is laughing and looking at Allison lovingly, and they all look like they're having a wonderful time. And mysteriously missing from all of these pictures is Thomas. In with these photo albums, she finds a note that is written from Allison for herself. This note says something to the effect of, "You are not Alina, you are Allison. Those religious zealots aren't your parents. They may look like them, but they are not them. Thomas isn't your brother. He's been here longer than the house. He's trying to drive you mad. The only thing to do is play along, and when he's least expecting or his mask slips, strike." And Eve remembers what the neighbor said Allison did to Thomas. She walks out of this room into a hallway that is inexplicably like a hospital hallway, and she sees Charlie standing down the hallway, motionless with her eyes closed, her skin pale gray like she's been there for months, not hours. Eve calls out to Charlie, and the trail of ants that had been trailing down the hallway all rush toward Charlie, cover her entirely. And now I don't like insects, so we're gonna cut it there a little bit. This part really freaked me out, and so I'm not gonna give it to you in the reading voice. I'm just gonna tell you they went inside the orifices of her face. Just the image of that really haunts me, and so if you're like me, you're welcome for not describing that in gruesome detail. But just as the ants do this thing, Charlie wakes up and sees Eve. "Eve, what are you doing here? You weren't supposed to come back. Why are you here?" Just as Eve goes to answer Charlie, they hear the woman coming down the hallway, and Charlie runs. Eve runs too, but not before she catches a glimpse of this woman and realizes she looks like the girl from the photos. She runs into a room, finds a wardrobe to hide inside of, and closes it, and watches through the crack as the woman, as Allison, walks in with the hammer, looking around the room for her. Just as she turns to go because she didn't find her, their eyes meet through the crack of the door. As they make eye contact, Allison's whole life plays before Eve's eyes as if it's happening right now. Her happy with her parents, a boy wandering out of the woods, her parents becoming more strict and cruel, them referring to Thomas as their child and Allison as the stray, then her s***ing him, waking up in a padded room, saying, "My name is not Alina." And just as the vision ends, the woman sets the hammer down and leaves the room. After some time has gone by, Eve decides it's safe to get out of the wardrobe. She grabs the hammer and she peeks out the door into the hallway. And somehow, the hallway is not the hospital hallway or any part of the basement that she's seen before. All of a sudden, it's a finished basement and a game room. She wants to find Charlie, and things are getting really, really weird. But with the hammer, she decides to brave it and heads up the stairs. And what does she find upstairs? Oh, Thomas and his wife and kids, of course, having dinner at the table. What else would they be doing? Oh, and they call Eve their aunt, Emma. She is bewildered and trying to figure out what is going on. Thomas grabs the hammer from her hand with a scold, and she just sort of starts playing along with what is going on, because obviously, what is going on? She sits down at the table, and Jenny asks, "What happened to the tattoo on your hand?" But she's never had a tattoo on her hand. Eve really is trying to play along until she can figure out what's going on, but then she sees Charlie's necklace around the wife's throat. And she says, "Where did you get that?" "Oh, I just got it at a thrift store." And she opens it up and it's empty on the inside. This is all too much for Eve mentally at this point. And without even knowing what she's doing, she's lurched across the table, across the kitchen, and is holding the bottle opener to the wife's throat. Thomas sends the kids away and says, "What are you doing? Calm down. Emma calm down. Eve is asking, where's Charlie? Where is she? Tell me where she is. And Thomas is acting thoroughly confused. Your ex, Charlotte? She's still in the city, of course. After some back and forth of all of this, Eve feels a sharp stab in her leg. The wife had grabbed a knife from the table and stabbed her in the leg. Then she looks up and notices that she had also returned the favor in the wife's throat with the bottle opener. Eve runs for the front door and can see Thomas reach for his wife, trying to blot the blood and calling the police, calling for the ambulance. She takes the hammer with her to the front door. She's trying to get it open. She's trying to pry it, do anything she can. She's starting to chip away at it and she thinks she might have success. And then she hears Thomas wail and she knows that this means his wife is dead, but he is screaming far more than that. She can hear him tearing the kitchen apart, and then he yells after her. So she says, yeah, no, scrap this. I will not be going out this front door. She runs up the stairs and tries to hide in one of the bedrooms. He follows her and starts slamming her into the bars on the window, and she takes the hammer in her hand and hits him in the head with it. And then they both stare at each other, shocked, surprised she had the guts. She goes to finish the job, which, thank goodness, in horror films, I swear, half the time, they don't even try and get safe by finishing the job. They just partially wound the person who's actively trying to kill them. Self-defense, guys, come on. But before she can finish the job, he grins at her with his face already half mangled and says, "What are you doing, Eve?" And he had been doing a very convincing job of calling her Emma for the last at least hour. And so this works just enough to get her to run out of there rather than finish the job. She heads up to the attic. She's like, maybe the window in the attic isn't barred and I can get up to the roof. She gets all the way to the window and a hand grabs her and pulls her back. It's Thomas. He's got his hands on her throat. He's suffocating her. She is losing consciousness and he is yelling, "Evelyn Palmer, we birthed you. We were here before the forests and the trees. You dare come for us. We gave life to the universe." She's on the ground. She's running out of strength. She thinks this is it. And then her hand grasps the tire chains and she swings them. It knocks him off of her, and what had been his fiery rant turns into a confused babble. She gets the chains around his neck and hears, "Freeze! Drop him!" It's the cops. Immediately after dropping him, they tackle her and they haul her out of the house. And as they're putting her into a police car in a yard full of police cars and ambulances and utter pandemonium, she sees at the edge of the trees Allison, still in the hospital gown, but otherwise looking quite different. No longer gaunt and frail, she looks full of life and filled out, and she has hair. She looks alive, and she backs into the forest and walks away. And that is mostly the end. It's not actually the end, but that's kind of the end of the horror arc. But there's more to it, okay? So the next clip that we see is one of those chapter cushioning moments where it describes the interview with Eve and the police. She is frantically telling them about what happened. Go back for this evidence. This is there and this is there. Where is Charlie? And they continue repeating to her, that doesn't exist. There's no hospital wing in the basement. None of your items that you say are there are in that house. She says, call my parents. They can verify who I am. I'm not Emma Faust. I'm Evelyn Palmer. And they say, we called the people you said. They've never had a child. They don't know who you are. After the interview ends, we cut back to Eve from her own perspective. She's in a prison psych ward, being called by everyone Emma Faust. She's in prison for killing her brother's wife and attacking her brother after being threatened with eviction. She knows that she's still Eve. She has not lost track of who she is, but she knows that she has to play along in this hospital. She's hoping that if she plays along well enough and has what seems like a recovery to them, then she has a chance to get out and to try and find Charlie. She has hope. Things are looking good. She hears good things about what they think of her recovery. And then she's in the visiting area, told she has a visitor, and she sees some ants on the wall. And then Thomas walks in. He's playing the worried brother who's come to terms with the fact that his sister did something that she didn't fully have control of. There's a condition that she has and she's being treated for it, and he's coming on the road to forgiving her. Throughout the entire conversation, Eve is terrified, just waiting for it to end. And as he gets up to leave, he says, oh, by the way, I thought I would bring this to you. I know it meant a lot to you and Charlie. And she looks up. That's the first time he's referred to her as Charlie instead of Charlotte. He hands her an envelope. She opens it up and pulls out the locket that Charlie bought with the picture of Eve in it. The last known picture of Evelyn Palmer. That's the end, but it's also not the end. We get one final scene, and it's an anonymous Reddit post saying, I came home one day to find the house that I had just bought with my partner look like it hadn't been inhabited for decades. I found my dog wandering around aimlessly in the woods, and my partner is nowhere to be found. I've been looking for her everywhere, but everyone who knows her acts like they've never heard of her. It's like she's never existed, but I won't give up until I find her. Okay, so that is officially the end of the content in We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. And okay, I hope that you followed on why this is such a fascinating story. There's just so much happening, right? I'm left with so many questions, but I'm left with the pieces to put together a satisfying enough answer, especially with the supplementary material. I've read some books that have supplementary material, kind of multimedia material sprinkled in that I didn't like as well, but I really liked the way that it did this because, as I mentioned in the beginning of my review, Eve is such a tight perspective in this book. We only see what she sees throughout the entire thing, and we need pieces of information that we can't get through her perspective, and so we start to get fed that through the in between the chapters section of multimedia. And honestly, reading this a second time, I liked it so much more because I got so much more out of those little pieces that are fed to you throughout the book than I did originally. So let's explore some of the questions that I had while reading this book, because I had many. First off, why did Thomas point out to Eve that there was something strange going on in the house? Is he a part of the ancient evil? It seems like it, right? Because he came out of the woods. It seems like the creepiness of everything that happens is following him, right? Or is it just following the house? Is it him? Is it the house? What is it? Let's explore this eldritch entity, okay? That's what I'm referring to the house as, or whatever it is that's haunting them. It's an eldritch entity, okay? It clearly has super reach, right? Because it alters birth certificate documents. It alters people's memories across the entire world. Or is it just creating another reality? I don't know. I don't know these things, but it's certainly affecting a lot of people and multiple things in the town. All of a sudden, is the motel open now? Is that because of the house? There's a lot of things happening here. It's altering memories of people in the community. It's removing listings on the internet of a whole police investigation. There's so many questions, and I want to know if Thomas and his family are real, or if they were real at any point. Him and his current family, not his family of origin. I've kind of bought the story that Allison and her parents moved into the house, and then he kind of came in and corrupted the situation, or the house corrupted it. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that that's what's happening. And we have that little snippet in one of the in-between chapter sections where it talks about you can't escape without a ritual replacement, and at the end we see Allison full-bodied and no longer creepy, and now no one knows who Eve is. That has to be a ritual replacement, right? Now Allison is good. She's on her own. She can head out, right? Did she escape? Or but there's all those things in the A-frame cabin that says old house about how to escape, and if you can and if you can't, and if you've been there so long, is it even possible to escape at that point? Oh, and while we're talking about the A-frame cabin, it says old house, but then the other house says remember which house you're in. And so obviously my first interpretation of that was the other one says old house to sort of trick you, or is it connected? And I remember the old man had some kind of a scarring on his face, the man who's you shouldn't be here, and I don't remember the description exactly because I didn't remember this while I was taking notes. While reading it the second time, I just thought of it while I was recording. He had some kind of a distinctive scar across his jaw, which is what happened to Thomas with the hammer. So is he Thomas, but later? Because when she goes upstairs as Emma instead of Evelyn, he no longer has the circular scars on his face. And so clearly he can do some sort of shapeshifting. That's not what they look like, right? But then why would he say that's not what they look like if that was him about himself? Right? But then we have this whole other element where another piece of information that we were given, or at least that someone had surmised about Old House, is that these entities that have been there for a long time, I'm trying to remember what they were called, anchors, specters, I don't know. They have motives that are hard to understand, and some of them seem to feed off of terror. So is Thomas just an entity that is involved in the house and has been there for long enough and is just trying to freak her out and make her uncomfortable from the beginning? And that's why he was have you noticed anything weird? weird to get her thinking about that. Like, did he instigate the magic, or did the magic instigate and he's just also there? That's my question. What do you think? Because, I mean, I think, my opinion, I think I'm deciding right now, is that the house is the house. The house is the ancient entity, and it's been there since before it was even a house. And Thomas is one of the things trapped there, one of the anchors, one of the specters. But he could just be the eldritch monster in personified form. I don't know. What do you think? I was just looking at my notes that I took while reading the book, and some of the questions that I was asking early on were when Eve closes the door after they leave for the first time and she puts her back to it and is relieved, she says she feels like something was left behind. And I was remembering what had happened. I had foreknowledge. It was my second time reading the book, with Thomas being the one who wandered out into the forest and basically wrecked Allison's family, changed her parents. And I was wondering, did he bring the evil with him and then leave it behind in his wake? I don't know. I think it's probably more tied to the house than it is tied to him. But I deeply wonder if his kids are real things, you know, or if they're kind of like imagined entities meant to haunt her. And like, is his family real? Did he escape for a while after the whole Allison incident and get to lead a normal life and forget about it all and then come back and get sucked back in? Probably not, right? Because there's just little moments where his mask slips, but it feels possible. But I am very sold on the idea that I think there was some kind of a ritual replacement that happened with Allison to Eve. And now Eve is stuck there. And we kind of get this peek into alternate realities. So it's like, did it splinter off into another universe? I don't know, because everyone knows Eve as Emma, and Charlie is now Charlotte in the city, but it seems like her Charlie is still there and looking for her. Is that like in the same plane of reality at all, or is she also looking for this erased Evelyn who has been, you know, replaced in this haunted circle? Maybe the house is feeding off of the entrapped people. I don't know, but it clearly is trying to trap people there in this labyrinth. And Allison, by replacing herself with Eve, seems to have been able to get free. So is there a way for Eve to get free? And does that involve having to trap another unsuspecting victim? And then comes an even greater question that I have. How is Mo, the monkey with the symbols toy, tied into all of this? I said that I had another thought about this, and here it is. Mo went missing when Eve was a child. Is it a coincidence, right? Like, is it just she had a toy that went missing, and then the house chooses to toy with her by sprinkling it in later? But the way that it went missing, has she been somehow targeted all along? Has this been going on her whole life? That's what I want to know. Because there's like those Reddit conversations in between chapters sometimes, and it was talking about like how this toy monkey did never exist, but so many people remember it. So was she just being followed by some kind of a specter from the house in the form of this toy monkey? Or did the toy monkey kind of become a part of the creep factor and the lore of the house after she got trapped there? I don't know. Basically, the question that I'm asking is, was Eve trapped there sort of randomly because she bought this house and all of the events played out? Or had she been chosen from the time she was young and was doomed from the start? That's what I want to know. There's so many things to this, right? Okay, so I think you can probably see now how there are so many layers to this book. And I can totally understand how upon first read, you might feel like that ending is super unsatisfactory. No one wants to end with the main character in a padded room with basically no hope of escape, right? But I feel like there's so many answers and layers given to you, and if you look back through them, the more you read into them, kind of the more you can piece together, the more chaos unfolds. I feel like we get enough answers that I am left with just the right amount of questions, just the right amount of intrigue to leave me thinking about it for a while, rather than just being disappointed that it's over and ended when it did. So I don't know if you will feel the same way hearing this story. Definitely let me know in the comments section below. I had a blast rereading this book. It was so creepy, and like I said, I liked it so much better the second time. So I'm glad I reread it so that I could discuss it more fully with you guys. This has been me reading the correct book, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer, instead of We Used to Live Here by Daniel Hurst. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of haunting that I just read a whole book about like the names being wrong. Like, my name is not Alina, my name is Allison. And like these layers of like, this thing is different now. And it's like, oh, I read two books by the same name that are totally different books. I feel like this this is just some kind of like horror serendipity falling upon me. I don't know if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like the video if you did and subscribe. It definitely helps my channel out and I really appreciate you being here listening to this with me. Feel free to follow me on Instagram, Goodreads, Storygraph, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight and are linked in the description below. Horror is not the only genre that I talk about either. If you're interested in romance, I discuss all sorts of romances. The most recent one that I discussed was Imogen, obviously. Feel free to watch that video. Nope, that's actually the name of a different book by the same author. The review that I'm thinking of is Amelia If Only. And if you like fantasy, I've been reading The Wheel of Time a book at a time and making a video describing how I felt, reviewing my thoughts about it. So definitely check out that playlist. And like I said, I ordered this book, it is not here. So we're gonna pretend I'm holding it while I hold the Audible of it. So we're just gonna work with that. But have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book.